In July, the United States and Cuba reestablished diplomatic relations after more than 50 years of not talking to each other. What does this new era imply for Florida and our nation in terms of trade and business interactions? Attorney Augusto Maxwell is with us to discuss the opportunities and challenges of easing relations with Cuba, next on Metro Center Outlook. Hello, I'm Diane Trees. With Florida's close proximity to Cuba and hundreds of thousands of Cuban Americans living in our state, the impact of normalized relations could bring about huge economic changes. Augusto Maxwell, chair of the Cuba practice at the law firm Akerman LLP and a lecturer at Columbia University School of Law, joins us today. Augusto, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
With diplomatic relations now restored with Cuba, we still have the U.S. embargo in place. How does this influence us going forward with trade and business? Can we do this?
Yeah, absolutely. What's kind of important to realize is that the embargo is a set of rules that have been put into place over 50 plus years. It wasn't just one act, it was actually a series of acts. It started with an enactment under the Trading with the Enemy Act, and it kind of goes back to the Cold War. And then more recently, you had an act, the Helms-Burton Act, that was triggered with the shoot down of the Brothers to the Rescue, which has very specific provisions as to when the embargo can be lifted. Typically, under U.S. law, the president has wide discretion in handling foreign policy. But under Bill Clinton and the events with the Brothers to the Rescue, a very unusual set of circumstances came together, and the Helms-Burton was enacted, and for the first time, an embargo was codified into U.S. law. So lifting the embargo fully, it would require an act of Congress. That said, the president has a lot of discretion, and you have seen from President Bush to President Obama, and then before that with President Clinton, each of them finding their own policy on how to implement the embargo.
So nuances along the way.
Yeah, for example, under Bill Clinton, you could visit, a Cuban American could visit a family member with whom they shared a grandparent, and you can do that once a year. On President Bush, you could only visit your immediate family plus your grandparent every 4 years. And then that was a very strict set of rules. And then with President Obama, you can visit anyone with whom you share a great-grandparent as often as you want.
Now, with the Castro brothers have been in power for decades, what has instigated the changes? Why now?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I first went to Cuba in 2002, as a Cuban American, I went to, maybe debate a few people and have a couple arguments about Cuban history and whatnot. And what I was struck by was how little support there was for the revolution and the acknowledgement that things needed to change. And I think a lot of folks felt that under Fidel that wouldn't happen, but under Raul it would. And with Raul's rise to power in 2011, they issued a very important set of guidelines for where they saw their economy going. And so far, they're 4 years into this project, and I think they're moving closer to a model that looks more like what Vietnam will have, where they hope to keep political control, but they hope to diversify and open their economy.
Can you summarize what the rapprochement means, the U.S.-Cuba rapprochement? What does it entail?
Well, again, it's driven by the president, right? President
Obama.
President Obama. It's been driven by President Obama on our side, and also by Raul Castro on his side. And with Obama's administration, they have basically done as much as they can to lift the embargo without doing an act of Congress. They've, I guess, come to the conclusion that the embargo wasn't going to give us the results that we wanted. Also, the embargo became a convenient proxy or excuse for the Cuban government to excuse its problems, to say, well, you're having difficulty, Cuban people, because of the U.S. embargo. Here's, the world's superpower trying to strangle us. And I think the administration made the decision to take that away. And I think it's interesting that the Cuban government allowed the embargo to be taken away as a rhetorical part of their governance. And so the idea that from one day to the next, the United States was no longer a mortal enemy, I think is a very significant thing for Cuba.
Do you think that the economics are the driving factor with this, both for the U.S., the U.S. economy, maybe not so much,
Right.
but for the Cuban side of things? What's the potential impact on our economy and then for the Cuban government?
Well, your first question about the Cuban economy, whether its problems helped drive this, and I think they have. I think with Fidel and the earlier part of the revolution, I think he had a lot of magical thinking, a lot of ideology that if only we're pure communists and work harder, somehow the economy's going to work. And as with all central planned economies, there are structural reasons why that model doesn't produce what it promises it's going to produce. And I think under Raul, it became very clear with these guidelines again that they didn't talk about moral or enthusiasm for the revolution. They explained very carefully why their economy was sinking. And it started with their inability to produce food for themselves. And so I think as of 11, the Cuban government has formally announced and recognized that their model didn't work and they want to move in a different direction.
I was very surprised to learn that the United States is Cuba's 5th largest trading partner, even with the embargo in place. How is that possible?
Yeah, it's mostly driven by the sale of agricultural products. And so about 10 years ago or so, Cuba was hit by a series of hurricanes. And one of the things that came out of Congress was an exception to the embargo to allow for the sale of agricultural products and the sale of medicine. And there are some restrictions on that. And so we peaked for a little bit and our sales have gone down a little bit. We are not allowed to lend credit to Cuba to buy our goods as most countries would. And so Cuba has to pay cash in advance before they can accept our goods. And so there has been for many years a kind of a robust trade in agriculture with Cuba.
What kinds of goods and services will now be allowed with the rapprochement?
One of the things that's happened is previously you needed a specific license. If you were providing travel services.
Now, license on the American side?
On the American side,
okay.
Yeah. So the government policeman for the embargo is the Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC. And in order to do anything with Cuba, you typically needed a specific license. And as a lawyer, I would apply for that license on behalf of a client and get permission to sell agricultural goods or sell telephone services or sell medicine and a series of things. One of the big changes with the announcements in January was that you don't need a specific license anymore. You kind of self-certify. For example, that you're in telecom or you're in ag and you're allowed to do things without first having to ask permission.
That's
a big change.
Yes.
That's a huge change. So that has sort of facilitated and made easy a lot of things that before would have been cumbersome and difficult.
Now, you talked about the different terms being in cash, the transactions. Business culture in Cuba, I would imagine, is quite different than the way it is in the United States. How can U.S. citizens become more savvy with what they need to know legally and with the implications culturally?
Right. So one of the things that's really interesting that doesn't get as much attention in the American media is the fact that a lot of Cuban Americans have already begun doing business on the island through their families. And one of the significant changes happening in Cuba is the idea that the Cuban government doesn't need to be involved in operating a restaurant, a bakery, a barbershop. Why don't we let regular Cuban people handle that part? We'll handle the airport and some other issues. So this idea of decentralizing and opening their economy, a lot of the capital for these businesses comes from family in Miami. And other changes in Cuban law now allow Cubans to freely travel off the island. And so you're seeing in Miami in particular situations where people are living half the year in Miami and half the year in Havana.
Okay. And I think I read that the Americans can now send a little bit more money back and forth. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
I'm not sure the banking standards or what's happening there.
So that's one of the big challenges is, for example, you can freely travel to Cuba as a journalist, and your credit card won't work or your phone won't work because your bank and your telephone company have, because of the embargo, haven't figured out how to do a contract the way it would have it in Japan or any other country. And so it's kind of exciting. Stonegate Bank out of Pompano was the first bank that has now signed this agreement, which is now allowed under the new January regulations.
What industries do you see, American industries in particular, that will benefit most or first even from this policy change?
I think there's a series of what we call carrier service providers and travel service providers that in the past needed a specific license, now can be done generally. And I think you've seen an enormous increase of Americans traveling to the island. I think some estimates 30% jump. So those are a lot of American companies that are handling those travel arrangements. And I think other things you've seen, Airbnb launched its platform to allow Americans to stay with private Cuban homes. I think that was a big transaction. And so in that space, I think it's the first immediate simple thing that a lot of folks are working on. The next step now is perhaps ferry services, maybe connecting the railroad, from Florida to a boat to Cuba.
You forget how close we are when you
That's
say
right.
ferry service. That's amazing.
Right. So ferry services, cruise lines are also working on being able to take American passengers to Cuba. I think that's the low-hanging fruit. As Americans have greater and greater freedom to travel to Cuba, they have resources, and American companies and persons are looking to help facilitate that legal travel. Other folks are looking, more in the medium and long term. There are folks who are looking to understand the Cuban lay of the land so that maybe one day they will invest in a hotel or invest in some other development. Others are looking at new opportunities in telecommunications, computers. A big part of the policy is the idea that the Obama administration has said, we don't want our government to be a reason that Cubans can't connect to the internet. If they can't connect to the internet, it's over there. The problem's there. It's not here. So they've created a lot of new possibilities that weren't there before for that.
Right. We're going to take a short break. When we return, we'll continue discussing the challenges and opportunities of doing business with Cuba. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Our guest today is Augusto Maxwell, chair of the Cuba practice for Ackerman LLP. We talked a little bit about tourism. Are U.S. citizens free to go to Cuba now as tourists?
No. So under the embargo as it stands, tourism, pure tourism, the idea that you'd go to the beach and kind of hang out with your family is not allowed yet. What you have to do in order to travel, which is greatly liberalized, you have to qualify under a series of exceptions to that. So a journalist can go, professional research can go, schools, religious categories, and others. So you still have to qualify, and it's sort of like filling out your tax code. You have to swear and sign that you qualify for one of those categories. And with those, I think the most popular is the idea of doing a people-to-people trip, where a group of 20 Americans goes with a guided experience to meet regular Cubans and experience focused ideas in, for example, architecture or religion or or other types of areas of interest.
Right. With the Cuban government recognizing the importance economically for tourism, what's the infrastructure like to bring in the influx that's possible now with the American citizens?
Yeah, that's interesting. Spain has been Cuba's biggest partner in the tourism field. Sol Meliá has almost 30 hotels on the island. And they have built out a large part of Varadero, which is a key off of Havana, and other keys. So that's sort of the all-inclusive beach experience that's kind of popular. And the other part of Cuba that's fascinating, I tell folks it's like going to Florence in the middle of the Bahamas or something like that. You get both experiences. And so part of Old Havana has been built for over 400 years. And that has a lot of boutique-type hotels that have been built very intelligently under the leadership of Eusebio Leal, the historian of Havana. And he's basically said, I only want as many rooms as the building allows me to have. And so that's a very different hotel product that's out there. And all of these, since I've been traveling since December, I think I've been to the island 6 times, it's a challenge to get a room. Because the Americans have indeed come to Cuba, and the rates of the rooms are increasing, and it's displacing a little bit of that bargain traveler that had been going to Cuba from places like Britain or Canada or Latin America.
Is it tourism, though, in the sense that most Americans are accustomed to? And I'm thinking of this in 2 ways. You have some restrictions, I would imagine. And you also, I would think that the accommodations are, as you said, not quite built or are more specialized. Is that?
Right, it's not like coming to Orlando, which really specializes.
And that's not good or bad.
Right,
it's
it's different. And so I think, you know, in Old Havana, the idea would be go to a heritage type hotel where the service is going to be good, but you're staying in a building that's 300 years old or was once a monastery, and it really is a great experience. But you know, Cuba doesn't have shopping opportunities. It doesn't have golf courses. It doesn't have some of the other things that an American might consider as part of.
There are different reasons.
Exactly right.
Right. What, with all the trips that you have made and you continue to make, what are you seeing in terms of transformations with infrastructure, renovations, new buildings? What are you seeing now?
Yeah, I think the infrastructure is still struggling. I've been going since 03, 02, and I've gone 50 times. And so it's like global warming. You kind of go there and you go, wait, that wasn't there before. I thought this was here. And so it doesn't hit you from one day to the next, but when you step back and look at it, you see there's been significant change, particularly in Old Havana, that's being restored with great care. And I think the Cubans tend to go for home runs, right? And so their latest infrastructure project is the Porto Mariel that they've done in collaboration with Brazil and other foreign partners. And in fact, they've built the railroad, and they've built the highway, and they've built the cranes, and so they've set it all up. It's an open question whether it's going to pay off and whether they're going to get the foreign partners that they want to make that area work. But they've invested a lot of resources in that infrastructure and not in the ordinary infrastructure that you would need in Havana.
And you talk about foreign investments with that infrastructure and that building. How stiff is the competition for U.S. businesses to come in now, even with the easing of restrictions?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think this new opening that we have, normal diplomatic relations, has been a signal to the rest of the world that Cuba's going to open up, right? And Cuba's natural economic partner is the U.S. The U.S. is, as you know, a dominant economy. And so a lot of folks see an opportunity in Cuba, and they're kind of taking advantage of the fact that the embargo still stops regular Americans from getting in there. And a lot of folks, a lot of our friends from Europe and Canada and South America and other places are jumping in to Cuba and investing now because they can, with the idea that they'll be able to take advantage of this opening with the United States.
What about the future of real estate, buying and selling land? Can Cuban Americans own land in Cuba?
Cuban American, someone from the U.S., the U.S. embargo would not let me do that. So under U.S. law, I can't do that.
So right now, you cannot do that?
No, I can't go buy land in Cuba. Cuban law, I think, is an open question as to who can and can't buy property on the island. Right now, Cubans are allowed for the first time to buy and sell their homes. That happened about a year and a half ago, buy and sell their cars. And a Cuban person is allowed to own up to 2 homes. So that's all very different. So what I'm seeing is a lot of family members in Miami are providing funds for their families to buy properties on the island. But an American or Cuban American at this point can't do that yet.
And now with the eased restrictions, the Americans can send a little bit more money to expand that sort of second party transactions.
Yeah, it's interesting. I, as a Cuban American, have no limits. I can send as much as I want to my family.
Is that under new restrictions
Under
now?
the new rules. You, as an American, have certain have limits. One of them allows you to spend, remit certain monies to support an independent Cuban business. So you can send, I think, $2,000 a quarter or something like that. Not a lot of that is happening, but it's beginning sort of chip away at the idea that hopefully would allow American foundations and others that are interested to help support independent businesses on the island.
Do you think, because we are in such close proximity with Florida being only 90 miles from Miami's to Cuba's borders, does that give us any additional or unique opportunities for business?
Yeah, absolutely. I think of at least 3 that come immediately to mind. One is there's a cultural affinity. You have Cuban Americans like myself who understand Cuba, and we have American friends who understand us as Cuban Americans. They will have a leg up off someone who shows up from somewhere that has never dealt with a Cuban American and our idiosyncrasies. So I think there's that cultural awareness. I think South Florida and Central Florida, they understand how to do real estate development, how to do tourism. I think those are going to be key components of the future Cuban economy. So you have the folks that understand all that, and we're right there.
So you have some basics in place.
Yeah.
What would be your number 1 piece of advice for American business owners who want to do business in Cuba?
Go to Cuba. It's now easy. It used to be incredibly difficult and time-consuming, and now it's very easy. There's 7 flights a day.
Do you think we'll be adding more?
We just added one from Los Angeles. I think there's some flights out of Orlando. There are flights out of Tampa, flights out of New York. So the logistics of the travel are there, but the law there is now supporting it. There's a red carpet for a business person to go to Cuba and see for themselves whether it's a place that interests them.
That go with someone like you that is well-schooled and skilled in
I'd be happy to take them.
In the situation. Has anything, though, surprised you that has transpired so far? I would love to know that.
That's a good question. I think I was surprised by the breadth of this opening. And I was also surprised by the lack of objection in Miami. My father was in the brigade that went to the Bay of Pigs. We lost a lot of things in the revolution. And I expected in Miami a strong reaction, and it never came. And so there are businesses like Carnival Cruise Line, which owns the Miami Heat. They've announced their intention to provide services to Cuba. There was no poop about it in Miami. So I think that's the biggest surprise. I think there's a sense of exhaustion on both sides.
Yes.
And like I said before, it's been a siege.
Yeah.
And I think the siege didn't work out the way folks wanted. And now they're kind of looking to see what's next.
Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
I've learned a great deal.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for our show today. Thank you for tuning in to Metro Center Outlook. Until next time, I'm Diane Trees.